not my finest moment. This happened some 10 years ago. It was winter and I had just discovered fapping, and needless to say I instantly became a great fap fan. So I was walking down a street at night bordered by houses and I got this idea of fapping while walking. It was winter so I was wearing a jacket. I snuck my right hand in, leaving the jacket sleeve empty. At first I was really conscious, making sure nobody noticed. But as I began to advance to the crescendo, my hand movement became more and more less subtle and almost stopped walking by the time I finished. I took out my hand, put it back in the jacket and began to walk, and that's when I noticed a woman in a balcony had been watching me. She shook her head and went back in. I quietly walked away. More and more less subtle. I just took the ACT and I feel like this is one of the wrong answers on the grammar section. Was going to write about how I had once fapped in a train bathroom, and then I read the comments here. Man, I live a boring life. I once fapped to a not hot at all news anchor, and I remember thinking, if I can fap to this, I can fap to anything. Like that was something to be proud of. When I was younger I tried to finish as quickly as I could because I thought that skill would come in handy later. That skill has not come in handy. Against the handle of a vibrating lawnmower while I was actively mowing the lawn. I was about 13 and came in my pants. Quite messy. My dad had a bad habit of bursting into his teenage son's bedroom without knocking. Normally it was fine cause I could hear him walking down the hallway, but he had his leg amputated and lived his last few years in a wheelchair. Rolling is much quieter than walking. So, one time I was jerking to pee on my computer, and he burst in right when I was at the point of no return. I just dropped out of my chair and hit the floor, spurting CM everywhere. There was a silence for a few seconds, then I just heard him roll backwards and quietly close the door. Neither of us ever mentioned it. I'm respecting your privacy by knocking, but asserting my authority as your father by coming in anyway. I work in a hospital and had to do a sort of self-defense course. Being one of the only sizable people in the room, they asked if I would play the attacker role. I got to roleplay choking like 20 cute nurses and jerked one out to it later that shift. Why is this so hot to me? Not me, my brother. When he was around 10-15, before P was over the internet, he had lots of P magazines. One day he felt like having the fap of his life, so he laid out all his magazines on the floor and he fapped furiously while walking on top of the magazines and looking at them. That's when Grandma opened the door. I really cannot begin to imagine what occurred in her head after that image. This is the best one in the thread. I just see him crab walking while giving himself a furious rub. These are nothing. I'm old. 57. So back in the 70s there was no easy access to pee. So you'll probably cringe when you see where this is going. Trust me, I'm full of shame and guilt still as I write this 40 years later. My dad had a safe in his bedroom. I shoulder surfed him one day and proudly rattled off what the combo was. He freaked out like I never saw him freak before. Held me down and made me swear I had never been in that safe before. Well, I hadn't, so I didn't lie and told him I didn't. Well, of course the 14-year-old me was curious and it drove me nuts wondering what was in there. So months and months of torturing myself, I finally got up the nerve and I opened the safe and looked. Tucked in behind all of his coin collections was a small photo album filled with Polaroid photos of my mom in the 50s, right after they got married, before she had me, naked. My god, was she freaking hot. And me having never seen a naked chick before, my dong went into full on nuclear meltdown mode. So I jacked it to her, again, and again, and again, and I knew it was wrong. Very wrong. And whenever I saw my mother I felt this horrible guilt, let alone the horror of being aroused by your own mother. Finally the neighbor next door was kind enough to throw away his collection of Playboys, or his wife did, and I found them. So I was able to stop going into that safe, thankfully, but to this day I still feel horrible guilt and feel fricked up about it. Oh wow, now that's shame. You've ascended beyond Oedipus complex. You've now got post-Oedipus stress disorder or something. I never get any private messages from hot babes looking for a 32-year-old unemployed man, so sometimes I pretend people like me and fap to the thought of it. I tore a ligament in my dominant wrist, but I don't have enough experience to be using my other hand to masturbate, so pushed my recovery date back 2 weeks. was worth it. I had severe tendonitis, couldn't even wash my own hair, and still took my wrist brace off to masturbate a few times a week. God, I hate myself. This was a few years ago. I just got out of a 4-year relationship and was having sex with a new girl for the first time since the breakup. It was 2-3 weeks afterwards. The sex was great and the chick looked better than my ex, but I just couldn't bust a nut. So I pretend to CM, get dressed and go home. On my ride home I began to fap while driving to memories of my ex and I having sex. My ex was hot, her mom was hotter, and wore skimpier swimsuits. Girlfriend caught me scoping her mom's thong-clad backside while ineffectually hiding a boner. Argument ensued, smoothed things over, then went to bathroom to knock one out. Teenage me was ashamed. 40-year-old me gets it. Got a vasectomy about 6 months ago. Finally time to get tested to see if I was shooting blanks or not. When I left the doctor's office after the vasectomy, they told me to call ahead to the lab of my choice to make sure they could run the test, because the sample is time sensitive. I called around to several labs, none answered. I knew they were open, and there was one that is close to home, so I just drove up there. Lady says they can do the test, and says, do you have your sample for the test? I did not, since I wasn't sure if they could do the test or not. So I said, no, I will come back with it. Now I have two choices. Beat off in their small bathroom in the waiting room with her literally on the other side of the door, or go back home. I decide to go back home. So I get home and my wife asks why I am home, and I tell her, the kids were being especially bad that day. I'm in the bathroom trying to rub one out while she is yelling at the kids, and the kids are hitting each other, etc. Could barely get it done but somehow I did. Didn't enjoy it at all. I think I understand why you got the vasectomy. Not mine, but the top story last time this thread was posted and it still makes me chuckle thinking about it. OP was in his tent and heard heavy breathing and screaming a few tents down. Listening to someone have sex really turned him on and he had his fap. Woke up the next day and found the tent he had fapped to was the residence to a mentally disabled boy who had had an episode that night. TLDR. OP masturbated to the screaming of a disabled boy. The Diary of Anne Frank. I obviously didn't masturbate to all the Holocaust stuff, but it was the diary of a girl, my age, at the time, who was in the process of discovering herself, both sexually and romantically. She also includes some very detailed descriptions of her body. For a frisky middle schooler, it was a reasonable thing to fap to, but, regardless, that's definitely the one I'm most ashamed of. I was 11. First fap ever. Thought farting would be a turn on. I ended up crapping myself and walking with a poey butt to the bathroom and didn't jack off for 2 years after that. LOL. I've never thought I should let one rip. It'll really enhance this wank. Skipped school, fapped in a graveyard. Fapped behind the cash register at my old job when it was quiet. Fapped off a bridge on New Year's Eve. Fapped in the middle of a vineyard. Pretty much fapped everywhere. At my super boring job, I realized I can almost masturbate just by spreading my knees out and back and again in a certain way. I thought only women could get off using only their legs and no hands. But it works pretty well, especially when I'm semi-erect. But it doesn't get me all the way there. So the other day, I jacked it in my car in the large parking lot outside work, looking at 8-month-old nudes. The most recent, sent to me by an old frick buddy of mine, came in a tissue paper I stole from the bathroom, put it in the driver's side door pocket. It's still there. 8-month-old nudes. Thought that was going to a much darker place. I live in the inner city and as I was fapping, a gunfight broke out. I still continued even as I thought about the people getting killed. Not me, but my friend who was visiting Europe saw one of those classical statues with no arms and legs and decided to fap to it later. I paid a girl to record herself talking crap about me. I gave her a list of my insecurities and everything. Dang, it's painful to watch at any ordinary time, but when I'm frisky, it's such a turn on. Dang, had to double take. First read that as, I paid a girl to record herself taking a crap. When I was a teenager I rubbed one out in the middle of a movie theater, sitting right next to two, both male, friends. It was during the 2002 Spider-Man movie. Right after Kirsten Dunst got caught in the rain, it was just too much for my 13-year-old self to handle. I pulled my sweatshirt over my knees and went at it under the tent it created. The worst part was, I looked to my right while doing it and said to my friend, "Are you freaking jacking off right now?" as he had his hands in his hoodie pouch. WTF did you do with your CM? I beat it to this wooden African tribal sculpture of a topless village girl when I was about 12-13, which my mom kept in our living room. Another top contender would be me jerking off to a nude plastic doll, one of those cheap Barbie knockoffs, by shoving it down my pants and moving it up and down along my pubescent dong. Definitely some of the worst lowest moments in my fapping history, but I turned out surprisingly non-weird with regards to any sexual fetishes, so I suppose it wasn't too bad. African tribal sculpture. That's a new one. Was around 14 and just learning about my sexuality and pee, and I learned that an ice cube is supposed to help with the stimulation. So I'm naked under my bed, it's midnight, and I'm rubbing this ice cube all over my gooch when suddenly the light of my room flips on and I duck under my covers. Normally I don't have much privacy, and if I ducked so quickly my mom would think I was hiding my iPod or something. I didn't have a phone then, and pull over the blankets to see. But somehow that night all she did was squint at me and put something on my dresser and tell me that I should be asleep by now. But in that panic my hand had slipped and I accidentally stuffed the entire cube in my vagina, and I couldn't fish it out afterwards, so I had to lay there and wait for it to melt, and that's the story of my first and last experiment in bed, along with a supposed bedwetting explanation the next day. I was about 13 and got the brilliant idea of quick fap while I was in the bathroom. This was before smartphones, so I had to go old school and imagine stuff in my head. While I'm going at it, the door suddenly opened up and there's my father. 18 years later and it's still not one of my proudest moments. Rule 1 to not get caught: lock the door. I was riding my bike home and I stopped to rub one out on a park bench. It was dark and no possible way anyone saw me, but it was still dodgy as frick. I believe this is called a bicycle pump. To this video, and the punster had just died that day and all the comments were saying RIP. I finished, then googled to see if it was real, and the shame sank in that I willingly kept going even. After speaking with boyfriend on my way home from work late at night, I felt the urgent need to have relief. Poor choice of place to pull car over to unzip and plunge my hands between my legs side of a main road. But hey, late night, hardly anyone around. Part of the way going for it, random dude wandering past whilst experiencing a LSD trip looks in and decides to get philosophical with me through my just cracked open window. Me, hand still down pants. Suffice to say, didn't finish. Interesting guy though. Not me, but when my dad was in the hospital, I guess his heart rate monitor went bananas in the middle of night and no cause was ever found. Had an attractive doctor, seemed suspect. RIP. Sigh. It was at a music festival which took place in the woods. I took half a pill of ecstasy and took the other half about 15 minutes later cause I didn't feel anything. Huge mistake. The next 3-4 hours or so I can't recall at all. Next thing I know is me slowly waking up from my trip, laying on my back in the woods next to the dance floor. Around me, a group of people laughing and pointing at me. It took me quite a few seconds to realize I was still stroking my flaccid dong like a madman. That was the last time I took ecstasy. I'm not sure if what you had that night was ecstasy. Back in high school, a friend and I dropped acid and a few hours later were walking around my neighborhood. I don't even remember how it came up, but we both were frisky, which is weird for acid, for me at least. We went on opposite sides of the road and found trees to hide behind and both jerked off. I won. I used my mum's phone to watch P, already shameful, and while I was climaxing my grandmother called, so I ended up jizzing to a pic of my gram. The old gram facial jam. No one will see this, so I won't even bother making a throwaway. I was going through old family videos when I was about 16. It was mainly just videos of my brother and I being idiots when we were young kids. Well, one of the tapes was cut short by another recording. It turned out my parents decided to make a sex tape. Instead of turning it off and forgetting it ever happened, I declothed and had a great wank. I then put the videos back in the TV cabinet and never thought about it again. That was until I came home from university a few years later and my parents were telling the story of my brother stumbling along their video and how awkward it was. I just played along and acted like that was the most awkward part of the story. I saw it, I know. I was about 14 and in my crush's room. She left the room to do something and I couldn't help my frisky 14 years old self and rubbed one out in about 20 seconds. I splodged into my other hand and didn't know what to do with it. So, I scraped my hand onto the inside edge of her fish tank. The fish ate it up and she walked back in. Fish ate the swimmers, haha. Once had a random guy message me on Kik about how he'd make me his wonderful little slave girl regardless of whether I wanted it or not. I gave him a piece of my mind, blocked him and then got off to that later in the day. This is a risky one. I was at school university in the middle of the most boring cognitivism lecture when my teacher said something about, and that's why when we have erotic dreams we don't actually feel the sexual act, but we do feel pretty much anything else easily in other kinds of dreams, which made me remember a dream I had about a classmate recently. Went to the school's bathroom, locked myself in a toilet room, came and went back to class. Everybody freaking knew. I was just so dang bored that I did it almost unconsciously. But yeah, they all knew. I've fapped to all kinds of weird, messed up pee-in fantasies. I'd be embarrassed if people knew, but that's not the worst. My real, least proud fap would be fapping to the fantasy of having a loving girlfriend I'm cuddling and holding in my arms as we fall asleep together. Posted this in a previous thread, but I let a girl that I had a crush on use my calculator for a maths test. When she returned it, I noticed she hadn't cleared the calculator. I then proceeded to wank to the equations she put in. In a tentative festival, I was randy as frick but couldn't score so I went for a nap. It feels freaking weird wanking in a tent at 2 in the afternoon fully able to hear the conversation in surrounding camps. Took me ages to splodge because it was so off-putting and I had no material. Eventually jizzed onto a wad of bog roll, went out and stuck it onto the gazebo. Later on at camp I'm first to comment, who the frick did that? A girl I once dated reminded me today that I once masturbated while eating cereal. That's pretty odd of me to do that. I don't know what I was thinking. Throwaway time. So back when I was like 15-16 my two buddies and I would always love getting into mischief. We had recently found 2 abandoned houses close by and decided to check them out. Well, they were both boarded up pretty heavily so we had to break in with a crowbar. We went in and basically trashed the houses. We took sledgehammers to walls, ripped crap etc. This had already been done to the houses so we didn't feel bad, plus we were stupid teenage boys. Anyways, we get to work destroying the second house. As we were ripping apart the walls we stumbled upon someone's pee stash inside the wall. We couldn't believe it. It was only one Playboy mag but holy crap it was awesome. I have no clue how but we all decided we should masturbate to it, separately of course as we may have been frisky but we had some dignity. So I went into the one room to do my business as the 2 other guys ripped out a page for themselves went into other rooms as well. I laid down onto a piece of ripped apart wall and did the deed. I walk out of the room only to find my 2 buddies cracking up as they told me they were just kidding and listened the whole time as I wanked it. Freaking wanted to die. TLDR. Found old Playboy magazine in wall of abandoned house. 2 buddies and I agree to beat in separate rooms. Beat it to 70s bushes. Buddies tricked me and listened into me moaning and jerking the whole time. Not funny guys. Honestly, they should be embarrassed for listening. Church camp. 14 years old. I held out as long as I could because I thought of all places God would be watching, it'd be church camp. It made it 2 days before I snuck out to the bathrooms at 3 AM and rubbed out a quickie. Now I'm an atheist, but the shame that followed wasn't worth the fap. Late to the party, but when I first learned about fapping I heard it called beating off, so I would actually beat it. Hold the base in one hand and then basically slap it back and forth with the other. Just freaking hit my dong over and over. Did that a few times and then one day it was sore so I was rubbing it. Hot dang, that felt way better. Frick, I'm a genius. So those first 3 or 4 are my least proud. After I put the kid I was babysitting to bed while I waited for the parents to come home. Oh god, terrible wording. The fapping had nothing to do with the kid. I just felt I betrayed the trust of the parents. Not me, but one time when I slept over at my friend's house, we slept in the same bed. Since it was a pretty big bed, and not even 5 minutes into trying to sleep, I started to feel the bed rock back and forth and I could hear his breathing grow heavier. It was happening. He was masturbating right next to me. I'm still not even sure if he was trying to hide it or if he just truly didn't give a frick and rubbed one out, regardless of how I felt about it. Well, anyways, I of course didn't want to sleep next to a dude choking his chicken, so I slowly slipped myself off the side of the bed and slept on the floor. I vividly remember the sound he made when he finished and how unashamedly loud it was. After his climax, he tossed around and immediately slept like a baby. What kind of monster can do something like that and sleep so soundly? I stayed awake the entire night, traumatized. Edit. Why does everyone want me to do gay crap with my friends? What's wrong with all of you? This sounds like the other end of a very similar story somewhere else in this thread. Meter. I was pretty stressed in college. During lessons, I routinely excused myself to go to the toilet, where I'd masturbate to help alleviate the stress. I wonder how many people do that at work. I also kinda think I don't want to hear the answer. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.